Hello everybody, Susie Heller is with us today. Susie has been involved in varying aspects of the food world for over 30 years, focusing on television and cookbook production. And she's worked with the likes of Jacques Pépin, Julia Child, Thomas Keller, and Charlie Trotter, to name a few. And she's going to share some amazing stories about her career. So Susie, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Thrilled to have you. You're the television producer for Julia Childs, which we'll get to in a little while.
Sure.
But I read that your mother was an amazing cook. She was Hungarian.
Yes.
So tell us about your mom.
My mom was probably my biggest influence. She was just a wonderful person, very outgoing. She was a stay-at-home mom, when we were young. So every day I could wake up to the smells of sort of baked goods in the oven and food cooking. So very early on I wanted to cook, to sort of emulate her. So I started cooking and coming up with dishes. I remember opening Gourmet magazine and saying, I want to try this, and not realizing you don't put artichoke down the garbage disposal. So the very first dish I did, I destroyed the garbage disposal, but she always encouraged me. And she was an entertainer, and I was an entertainer, which took me into catering.
But you were born in Cleveland?
I was born in Cleveland. I'm a Midwest girl.
So you went to school there?
I did. I went to school there, then I went to college in Denver, and then went to graduate school in Stanford.
And what did you study there?
I studied education. I decided I was going to be a teacher. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And my parents, it was it was the era where you said, God forbid something happens to your husband, you can always fall back on teaching. So I became a teacher and I enjoyed it, but I only did it for about 2 years.
And then what was the transition into the food world?
I loved cooking, so I entertained a lot.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, people started calling me and saying, well, we understand you're a really good cook. Would you cater my party? And so I agreed to do one party, and it was some people having a graduation. And I made a big, giant trifle in a perfect big bowl, all the raspberries lined up. Everything was perfect.
Yeah.
And then I took it to their house, not realizing their driveway was steep, and the entire trifle spilled over in my car.
Oh.
So I had no choice but to scrape it up, put it back in the dish, go home, throw on more fruit, took it to her house, and thought, I will never send her a bill. I will never pick up the bowl. And I just left, horrified. And then she called me about 3 days later, and she said, Susie, how could you do this and not leave business cards? Everyone wants to know who you are. And that was the day I decided I could be a caterer.
Oh, that is
if that worked, anything would work.
That's a fantastic story.
Thanks.
Tell us about Jacques Pépin.
Jacques Pépin, in the food world, he's been my biggest influence. It changed my career meeting him. And it was 1985, and I had a friend who was having a big birthday, and her family came to me, and they said, where should we send Kathy? It's going to be her big birthday, and we want to send her to a cooking school. And I had taken 2 very large group classes with Jacques, and Jacques had given his phone number in case anyone wanted to know about his classes, because now people know him from television. He's done, 24 shows, 30 books. I don't know the exact numbers, but tremendous amount. But back then, everybody didn't know him, but he was my idol in the food world. And so I called the number thinking I'd get his assistant to see where he was teaching, and a woman answered the phone, and I said, I'm calling to find out Chef Pépin's teaching schedule. And all of a sudden I heard the woman yell, Jacques, pick up the phone. It was his wife, Gloria, and it was his home phone that he gave 500 people at a cooking class. So he got on the phone, and when he gave his teaching schedule, he told me he was going to China. And he was going to China with Cindy Paulson. Of course, we all know Cindy.
Yes.
And Bo Freiberg, who was a pastry instructor at the Culinary Institute in St. Helena. And there were 15 food professionals going. And I said, well, how do you get on this trip? And he said, you pay. And that day I'd gotten a big catering job and talked to my husband and took the trip, and it changed my life. He asked me to assist him in China, which I did. And then he said, I've never had an assistant, but if you want to pay your way and come to Connecticut, every other month, I'm doing a book called The Art of Cooking. It was 2 volumes. And he said, you can come and help me cook during photography. So that was really my culinary education. For 2 years, I went to his home in Connecticut. He'd pick me up at the airport. We would shop. We would cook and do thousands of photos for that book.
How serendipitous. I mean,
it really was.
Did he know that you were a good cook when you called?
No, no. He didn't even know I was on the trip. I mean, it was just that phone call. Then I arranged to go on the trip.
Wow.
So being pushy,
Yeah.
they loaded the plane, and I saw there was an empty seat next to him, so I changed seats. And we
love
talked,
this.
and we talked the entire way to China.
Oh my God, this
and
is
he
great.
asked me to assist him, and I was really nervous about that because it was for television cameras. And the first day, all the media was there to watch Jacques Pépin cook. And the first thing he did was he took a giant bowl of Granny Smith apples and handed them to me with a paring knife and said, "Would you peel these?" And the fact that I didn't die right then, I think, was, my trial by fire.
Oh my
As
Lord.
I peeled the apples. And
On TV.
Yeah, it was great.
What an amazing story. Wow. So then how did you meet Julia Child?
Well, that was several years later. With Jacques, he wanted to do some television. And he said to me, "You could propose it to the Cleveland Public Television." And I did. And they were very interested in doing a show with him. But at the last minute, they changed their mind and decided to do the show with me. So talk about awkward. I ended up with the series. So Jacques...
Wow, that's testament to how good you are.
No, it was really, or probably how inexpensive. So Jacques then made a deal with KQED to come out and start doing a television series in San Francisco. So I started traveling with him to San Francisco to work on his show. And then a producer from the East Coast came to watch the show one day and to see how it was all organized. And he watched what I did. And the role that I was doing really didn't exist then. I mean, I sort of coined the phrase culinary producer because they didn't know what to call me, because I was the liaison between the chef and the producers and directors and people who maybe didn't know as much about food. So Jeffrey Drummond's his name, and it was a la carte communications. And he was there and he watched me and he said, "I'm going to bring Julia Child back to television." This was the late 80s, early 90s. Mm-hmm. "Would you like to come and be her culinary producer?" And I thought, well, that's never going to happen. She must have hundreds of people that want to do this. So I said, "Sure, call me, no problem." And a year later he called me. He said, "Okay, are you ready?"
Wow.
That was a dream come true.
A dream come true,
It
I
really
would
was.
say.
It really was. Both knowing Julia and also the job, because the first series, we had 16 chefs around the country. So they were all top chefs. And what I did was I traveled around the country to meet with each of them, eat at their restaurants, and decide what they were going to cook on the show. So that was a really
That was, yes, amazing.
And my big find was Emeril Lagasse, because they didn't know who he was. And I had worked with him on a project. I said, we need to put Emeril Lagasse in the series. So we put Emeril on. And when I went there, we did a big crawfish boil with Julia. And it was our best show. It really was.
Amazing. Now, how many years did you do this for?
Well, we did that first show.
Yeah.
And then we did a show where we had 26 of the top chefs cooking at her home in Cambridge. So literally, we would have a top chef in her basement. We prepped in the laundry room. So they would be in the laundry room prepping their food, and we would have an equally famous chef upstairs shooting the show. So we did that series, and I'm not sure what year that was. Then she did a baking show. Then we did her really famous show, which was with Jacques. They were both cooking together.
Oh, wow.
And that was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And then we also did 2 specials. So I'm not sure what year we stopped doing those, but that was the end of her career on television. Then she moved to Santa Barbara, where she spent the last few years.
Where did she live when you were doing these? Where was
Cambridge.
her home? Oh, in Cambridge.
Yeah. She had a great big old house in Cambridge.
Yeah.
Her husband was a painter, and the house was filled with his artwork and stained glass, and it was pretty extraordinary. I mean, I had met Jacques, and we went to a PBS function in Boston. And I hadn't met Julia yet. And he said, "Okay, we're going to Julia's house for breakfast tomorrow." And I said, "To Julia Child's house? You can't do that. You can't just take me to Julia Child's house.
Oh, that's
I'm not
great.
invited."
Yeah.
He goes, "You're invited. She's going to make me cook." So I said, okay. And we walked in, and I'm not sure if you know who Martin Yan is.
No,
but
I
he's
don't.
got restaurants in San Francisco, but he's a very famous Chinese chef who has a lot of cooking shows and books. And he was there also. And the minute we walked in, Julia said, "Jack, just go to the refrigerator. There's some eggs, there's some ham, there's some cheese. Just make whatever you want." And I had breakfast at Julia's and got to meet her husband.
Oh.
So, yeah, I was pinching myself a lot.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And I think I remember you telling me one time that you brought Thomas Keller along with you. So tell us a story about Thomas Keller and Julia Child.
Julia, well, it goes back very early on when we were shooting Julia's show. We were traveling the country in that first series. And Thomas, I had met Thomas in the mid-'80s while he was a chef at Checkers. No, first time I met him, he was a chef in New York at Raquel, then at Checkers in Los Angeles. And he had just left Checkers. And we were shooting this series, and I said, hey, Thomas, we're coming to LA. And he said, well, let's get together. And I said, I know this is totally ridiculous, but if you want, I have $100 a day for a prep cook for each of the chefs that we're featuring on the show. He said, I'll do it. Then, of course, the chefs totally freaked out when I would tell this chef that Thomas Keller was their prep cook. They couldn't match, like if he chopped an onion and I would say to the chef, now you chop an onion and add it to the bowl. The chef looked at me and went, does it have to look like that onion? You know, I mean, he was so extraordinary.
That's amazing.
Then we came up to San Francisco, so he came with us. And we shot up here with Alice Water, Jeremiah Tower, and Jan Birnbaum, who recently passed away, who was an extraordinary chef.
Yes.
And we came up to Napa Valley, and that was my first time in Napa. And it was just, it took my breath away. And then Thomas said one day, he said, I want to show you something. And he took me to the French Laundry. And the French Laundry was still owned by Don and Sally Schmidt and operating. But the minute I walked into that garden, I said, this is your place. I mean, this is it. And of course, it became his place.
Gives me goosebumps. So that was his first restaurant?
That he owned. Well, he was a partner at Raquel. But yeah, French Laundry was his baby. Now, of course, it's an empire.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And he owns Yonville.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing.
It's great.
Incredible
I love it. I mean,
stories.
that's like eating home for me, so I love it. I've done each of the books from each of the restaurants.
Well, that's right.
So,
now, you wrote all of his books. How does that work?
Well, when you say you wrote all the books, I put together a team, and I oversaw all the writing of the recipes. And then Michael Ruhlman did all the sort of the prose work. You know, he did all the head notes and all the essays with Thomas. So Michael and I together really did that. Yeah.
How fun.
It was
oh my
really
God.
fun.
What an amazing life you've had. An incredible life. It's a wonderful journey.
Well, I've done like a dozen books, and people say to me, so what do you like to cook? And I say, I don't usually get to pick, because if I'm working on a book, that's what I cook. So when I did the Pizza Bible with Tony Gimignani from San Francisco, all I did for 1 year was pizza. I did a chocolate book with John Scharfenberger. All we did for a year was dessert.
Oh,
so it really depends what project I'm working on. That's really the foods. So I have to select carefully, because I'm going to be eating that for quite a while.
So you said when you were contributing to these books for Thomas Keller that his chefs will come to your house. Mm-hmm. Tell us how that works.
Well, when we did the French Laundry, I lived in Cleveland. And so when I first came out the first time, Thomas took me into the restaurant kitchen. And the problem was, I saw right away, first day, was one person over here did sauces, one person here did prep for vegetables, so that it wasn't coming together. And I said, this doesn't work for me. Somebody has to go into a home kitchen and cook the recipe. And while you cook it, I'm going to weigh it, I'm going to measure it, I'm going to whatever. And then later I'll test them. And I learned this from Jacques, because I watched Jacques write cookbooks. And this is how he did it. So what we did was we went into Thomas's house next door that had this little electric oven.
Electric?
And that's where we developed the recipes. So
you're kidding me.
It was Thomas, and then his sous chef was Grant Achatz, who's got in Chicago Alinea and Next, and he's just one of the greatest chefs in the world, actually. And he would come over every day, and we developed the recipes. And then I tested some here in Yountville, and some back home when I went home to Cleveland. And then after that, I've always had chefs come. I won't do it in a restaurant kitchen. So I have chefs come to me.
What a production, though. So they're cooking and you're weighing and measuring and then documenting.
There's a learning process when you have a chef come in.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Cerciello was the chef at Bouchon when I did the book. And he came to my house, and the first recipe he did was their fabulous trout with green beans and everything on it.
Yeah.
So he prepped he was doing it at my house, and he prepped the trout, and he did all this, and we were doing recipes for 4 guests. And he said, okay, now, when the order comes in, you heat up the pan. And I went, whoa, there's no order. There's 4 people having dinner. you have to have all 4 trout ready at the same time.
Right.
And he was like, what?
Oh.
So we have to retrain their minds of how somebody at home cooks, and every one of the chefs has adapted amazingly. But there's just a little learning period.
Of course.
Where they learn that we have to know what that weighed, we have to know, because what's important is that the recipes work.
Right.
And for years, chef books never worked. And because they would test them in their own kitchen.
Right. I'm going to digress a little bit here, but I want to ask you, how do they figure out the calories when they talk about calories of all these foods that we buy? And
that's really a good question, because the only really correct way to do it is to take the finished dish, have it pulverized, and have a lab do it. Because this is actually a pet peeve of Jacques, right?
Yeah.
Because you go to cook something and you fry it in let's say a 1/4 cup of oil. Well, when you're done, the 1/4 cup of oil has not gone into the food you're eating. There's some still sitting in the pan.
right.
And yet, they'll put it into the calorie count.
Yes.
So you really need, someone with, the only way to get it really correctly is to do that. And I do believe that that's what they do when you buy foods and you look at the label.
You think so?
We normally don't put calories in a cookbook. First of all, we don't want you to cook by calories.
Yeah, yeah.
And
we don't want you to know how many calories you're eating, because they put so much butter.
It depends what you're eating and how you're balancing your day.
Yeah.
It's like the amount of protein and the amount of plant-based
Right.
foods you're using.
Right.
It's very individual. Some people swear by paleo and they're going to eat tons of fat, tons of meat.
Right.
Other people want to eat all grains and
Yes.
all these soluble fibers and things. Everybody's got their own sort of path.
Yes.
But calories, it's a toughie.
Yeah.
It's a tough one to figure out correctly.
Yeah. And everybody's body digests food differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Can we go back to Julia Child?
Always.
So, yeah, I know. She's so loved. So what was it like to travel with her?
She would work harder than anybody else in the room. I mean, that woman, when we did the first series, she was actually writing the book at the same time. And she was up early, and she'd stay up late. And I mean, I lived in Cleveland, she's in Boston. Sometimes she would call me at midnight. Sometimes she would call me at 7 a.m. I mean, it was just, she worked always. She was a hard worker, and she knew how to have fun. Yeah. But we would definitely get the task completed. And she was no nonsense. She wasn't hugely sentimental. The way you see her on television was really her personality. Oh. I mean, I think this is why people love Jacques, love Julia, loved Tony Bourdain, was because they're so real, and that's the person that they are. The person that you're seeing on the screen truly is the person that they are. And we would finish the day, we would usually she liked a reverse martini. To this day, I'm not sure. I think that's mostly vermouth. Yeah. And we would open up the Costco-sized thing of goldfish crackers.
Oh, no.
That was her snack of choice. So after a day of production, and one time I saw Goldfish was sponsoring something at the CIA, and I said, did you know this? And these poor guys were like, no. I went, yeah.
Oh,
we would eat goldfish
God.
Every day.
I couldn't believe it. Well, I thought it was very funny because she didn't know who Thomas Keller was, did she?
No, she didn't. No, because initially he was my friend and he came along, and she hadn't eaten at the restaurants that he was at. And Thomas was as phenomenal a chef as he was a little bit under the radar. He wasn't doing television, he wasn't. He had his nose to the grindstone. He was just, really honing his trade, and. So she didn't know. So when we did the first series, he was there. And then the second series we did, I begged to have him on the show, but she didn't. We'd already had the chef scheduled, and she kind of didn't see it because she never saw him in a restaurant. So unfortunately he wasn't on the show, but they were very close. He would cook her special food when she came to French Laundry. He would roast her a chicken.
Oh.
Because if you gave her a plate and it had like one little shrimp sitting on it, and I'd been there when it happened, she would just sit there and stare at it like, what is this? Give me some food. She liked food.
Oh, that's wonderful. She sounded like a lovely woman.
She was a lovely woman, and she was really an inspiration to everybody around her. She really, really was. And I think even especially to women. I mean, because for me, the amount of strength that she showed, and not, dealing with, not carrying around the small stuff. I mean, one of the things I learned from her was let it go and move on.
Yeah.
If something happen. I mean, she had a lot of hard times in her life, but she could always leave it behind and let it go. And that's how she treated everything.
Great skill.
In life, and even when she knew that it was near the end, same thing. It was very matter of fact. You know, she told me, we called the Neptune Society. They picked me up.
Oh my God!
I mean, she just was very, you know, forward about what she did. She spoke the truth about whatever the subject was. She would speak her truth.
So she wasn't a prima donna off camera. No, she was just who she was. Yeah,
well,
isn't that wonderful?
One great story that happened in Napa when we came out and did the shooting here. She says to me at like 5 PM, she said, "You know where I would love to have dinner?" I said, "Where?" She said, "Trevina. I heard it's very good." And I said, "All right." So I called Trevina. It was the height of the season. I knew they'd be jammed. I got someone on the phone. I said, "Look, no is totally acceptable. I can make the excuse. But Julia Child would like to come in for dinner, and we're like a party of 8.
Oh.
And so you could hear the guy gulping on the phone. He came back, said, "Can you wait 30 minutes?" I said, "Yes." And Trevina had this oval table in the corner that was raised above the restaurant, a couple steps up. And we got to the restaurant, and literally it was wall-to-wall people. They had to kind of push their way through the crowd to get us back to the table. And we sat at the table, and she was looking out, and she turned to me and she said, "I think we were quite lucky to get in."
Oh my God, so understated. I love it. That's a beautiful story.
I said, "Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
We were really lucky."
Yeah. So you're best friends or very good friends with Thomas Keller, and what has he got cooking at the moment? I know he has a new restaurant.
It's hard for me to. It's really hard for me to keep up. I mean, he's going to be opening a Mexican restaurant.
Yes.
Where Hurley's was.
Yes.
And I'm sure it'll be fantastic. I'm very excited for that. He's opening in Florida, a place that's called Surf Club. I know.
They stretch themselves
and
so
in,
thin.
in New York, he's going to be opening at Hudson Yard, and that's a huge, huge project. And I don't exactly know the timetable for that, but he'll be opening there.
So he's got 3 new restaurants.
Yeah, I mean, and he has fantastic chocolate. Have you tried it?
No.
It's called K+M.
Oh.
It's phenomenal. It's made. He did a collaboration with the person he buys olive oil from, Mani. So it's Keller plus Mani. Oh. And there's no cocoa butter in it. It's olive oil. It's extra virgin olive oil.
Wow.
You really should try it. It's the best dark milk chocolate I've ever
Where
tasted.
do you buy
in
it?
my life.
At Bouchon?
They sell it at, they have it, you can get it online. I know you can get it online through K+M. And they have it at some, where did I see it? I saw it at Oxbow once, at the Oxbow Produce.
Oh, yeah.
So it's around, it's probably at the upscale markets.
Unbelievable.
But
he's so
boy, is it
talented.
good. And he has a caviar company now.
He has a what?
Caviar company.
Oh, my, he does?
Yeah, he did a collaboration with someone on that, too.
Oh, yeah, because he's got so much time.
So much spare time.
Unbelievable. Let's talk about you. You had your own television cooking series.
I did two series. I did a series with public television in Cleveland, and then I went with cable, which was the new thing. And the person I'd worked with, the producer I'd worked with, was moving to cable. So I said, okay, move to cable, and then cable went bankrupt in 6 months in Cleveland. So then I started doing the production end with Jacques, flying to KQED and doing that. And I've stayed. I really love doing production. We just did a great master class. I don't know if you know masterclass.com, that series.
You mentioned,
but I have to say,
our viewers about it. Yeah.
Thomas did a fantastic class. I mean, it's like 6-7 hours long.
Okay, can you explain to our viewers what that is?
Yes. There's a group I think they're located in LA and San Francisco, but it's masterclass.com. So they work with the people at the top of their field in doing a class. So Steph Curry did one this year on playing basketball. You know, they had Christina Aguilera on singing. They had Patterson on writing. They've had Bob Woodward. You can't imagine the roster. Helen Mirren. Oh. And the classes are they're fantastic. It's a big production. I'd never worked on a production that was that big before.
Right.
You know, just the sheer volume of people and the quality of the cameras and everything. It was really interesting for me.
So tell us, what did you do with?
I was a consultant. So each talent, when they do a show, they get to bring along somebody that's kind of their person. And so Steph Curry brought his coach. Right. You know, I'm not sure who the singers and things bring, but I was Thomas's.
Masterclass.com.
Yeah, it's
oh,
really.
It sounds fantastic.
It really is. I was really.
So
impressed
went
with
for 7 hours in one day.
It's like 6. No, we shot over a week, but it's been edited down. So there's lots of chapters. There's probably at least 20 chapters involved in it, and so you can watch it all at once. The first class we did, it was on pasta and eggs and vegetables. Was the first one.
Okay, I have to watch this.
Yeah, you really do.
Really? They're like almost like TED Talks.
They're really, well, they are very much. You
Yeah.
know, we shot it in a beautiful home kitchen, and it was a treat.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great.
Tell us about some of the other chefs you've worked with.
Oh, there's been a lot of them. Let's see. Well, in the Bay Area, Tony Gimignani, he's won the pizza championship 12 times. I mean, he's incredible. If you've never been to Tony's Pizza Napolitana in North Beach, and he has a restaurant, Capo's, it's the best, the most amazing pizza.
Okay.
Murad Lalou is like a brother to me. He's in San Francisco. He has Murad, and he's doing that book was really fabulous. Murad's Moroccan. That was really great.
Oh, Moroccan food. I love Middle Eastern food.
His restaurant is really interesting because he takes it up a notch.
What's the name of the restaurant?
Murad.
Murad. Oh, yes, I know.
It's really good. I mean, I tell people really to go there because it's different, and the attention to detail is extraordinary.
Yeah.
He got a Michelin star. I mean, it's really great.
Yes, I've heard.
Then I worked with Charlie Trotter, as you mentioned, for several years. With Charlie, I did testing of his books. I mean, it was a perfect example. There weren't people who were watching chefs and what they were doing, and so their books didn't work. So publishers didn't want to take them. So I worked. Charlie was on Julia's show, and he had just written his first book. And I said, "Who's testing it?" He said, "Oh, my staff is testing it." And I said, "Okay, do me a favor. Send me 3 completed recipes. Just let me look at them, no charge." So he sent me 3, and the first one was for a stuffed tomato. And it served 4, and called for 4 tomatoes. The last instruction said, put 2 on each plate. So I sent him that back with a bunch of notes, and then I became his tester. So
I love that.
That was before we did French Laundry. That was back before.
So funny.
Yeah, so that was fun. It for me, I've had publishers ask me about doing my own book, but I have always found it so much more interesting to work with someone who's a genius in their field, who's brilliant, because then I'm learning.
Yeah.
I'm not learning if I go in the kitchen and say, what should I make with kale today? It just has never interested me.
Yeah. And then you've got some credits along the way with some Emmy Award-winning television shows too, right?
Yeah. We've gotten awards. We've gotten some awards. We've been lucky that way. And
really fun.
Yeah.
What about Jan, who just recently passed away?
Jan
was sad.
He was so amazing.
Catahoula's up
he
in
and I
Calistoga.
became friends when I started shooting with Jacques at KQED. We stayed at Campton Place, which was really rough for me, traveling from Cleveland and being at Campton Place for about 3.5 weeks.
Oh.
Jan used to say, "You must be ready to go home." He was the chef there. I said, "Jan, every day they make my bed, change my towels, and put chocolates on my pillow. I have 2 kids at home." I went, "Really? No, I'm just fine." So Jan was a chef there.
Yeah.
And that's how we became friends. And then he moved. He was at Catahoula. Catahoula, which I loved.
Was fantastic.
Fantastic.
Why did he give that up? I can't remember.
I
was here when he gave it up.
Maybe the building changed hands.
Maybe.
I don't remember, but then he went into San Francisco.
Yeah.
And working with Pat Coletto. And so I didn't see him as much in the later years. I mean, I saw him, we had lunch, probably about a year ago, because he was in the city and working and I was here. But when I first did my kitchen, I have a big kitchen, and it was my pride and joy. And the first time I finished it, and that time, Jan was, I don't know, maybe 300 pounds. I mean, he was a big boy. He was a big boy.
Yeah, he really
was. And he came in my
Mm-hmm.
kitchen, and he stood at the end of my island, and he looked at me, and no one had cooked in it yet. And he said, "I can do some real damage here." And I said, "Great." And he did, because he came and he'd cook, and he'd make pizza, and flour would be everywhere. And, but he had the biggest heart. He was all heart.
Everybody loved him.
Everybody loved him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have like 20 seconds to wrap it up.
Sure.
I knew that we would have to do 2 shows. So I have to have you back because we have to finish at 30 minutes. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I'm just sitting here like riveting.
I know, I probably blabbed too much. There's too many stories in there.
So many stories. I'm in awe. I'm in awe, and I know our viewers will be too.
Oh, so good. Thank you so much.
To be continued. Thank you so much.
Thanks. It's such a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much.